August 7th, 2020 marks the 5-year anniversary of Josh Trank's Fant4stic. And as I mentioned in my review for Capone, I had never actually seen Fant4stic before, so I figured it was probably time to give it a watch, especially since the movie has kind of been back in the public consciousness thanks to the announcement of Zack Snyder's Justice League. I don't think Josh Trank will ever get the chance to retool his film, but that doesn't make Fant4stic any less interesting to watch. And honestly, this movie wasn't as terrible as I thought it was going to be. Don't get me wrong, it was still very fucking bad, but it wasn't the absolute train wreck or dumpster fire that I was expecting. The film just was an inoffensive mess. When I describe the Justice League movie, I like to use the word visionless, since Snyder and Whedon's visions were clearly at odds with each other, resulting in a movie without a clear direction. And that same concept applies here as well, since Trank clearly wanted to make a Cronenberg-esque horror film, but Fox gave the movie a bland, generic Marvel kind of tone. Like a bargain bin Marvel movie you would have found in the late 90s, filled with bad, humorless jokes, dull cinematography, forgettable music, a paper-thin plot, and terribly boring characters. And the uninspired Marvel elements don't really mesh well together with the Cronenberg elements. So we're left with a movie that isn't fun and exciting, or thrilling and haunting. Fant4stic is just an underwhelming experience. I didn't feel anything while watching it. I probably would have had a better time if I had just stared blankly at a black TV screen for an hour and a half, because watching Fant4stic is like watching a bunch of nothing. This movie has nothing to say about the Fantastic Four characters, or their respective source material, or the world they live in. So as you're watching the film, it becomes abundantly clear that the only reason it exists in the first place is because Fox didn't want to lose the rights to these characters, so they pumped out a movie as fast as they could. I mean, this is the entire film in a nutshell. 4 people gain superhuman abilities, Dr. Doom is evil, and then everyone fights at the end. That's literally it. Nothing profoundly meaningful or insightful ever happens. There are no unexpected twists or turns, so the whole movie feels painfully predictable. And you would at least hope that you would care about the characters and the journey that they go on together, but no, the characters aren't very interesting at all, and they somehow become even more boring after they get their superpowers. The film doesn't even bother to show us how these people learn to control their abilities like any other normal superhero origin story. There's not even a montage sequence. Instead, these important moments are just skipped over. If you didn't know anything about the Fantastic Four, this would be a very strange film. You would be watching an hour of normal people doing sciencey stuff, and then 40 minutes of the same people having superpowers, and absolutely nothing in between to bridge those two storylines together. Literally, because as soon as the Fantastic Four get their powers, the film cuts to 1 year later. But you can kind of see what Trank was going for in certain scenes, so early on in the film, you have hope that the rest of the narrative would be building to something interesting. But as I just stated, nothing interesting ever happens. So Fant4stic is a movie that feels like it is perpetually stuck in the first act. An hour of the film is spent setting up the promise of something engaging to happen later, but then once the characters get their powers, the movie starts wrapping up. I honestly couldn't believe that we got to spend virtually no time with the heroes of the movie. I can't tell you anything about these characters. Reed Richards and Ben Grimm are supposed to be like brothers, but I really don't see why they would ever be friends when they are so drastically different from one another. Reed shows some romantic interest in Sue Storm, but Sue never showcased any interest for him, so I don't buy that these two characters would eventually end up married to each other. Everyone hates Victor Von Doom, and I have absolutely no idea why. I know he becomes evil Dr. Doom later on, but everyone is mean to him before we even get to see him do anything evil. The most interesting aspect of the entire movie is probably the fact that Sue and Johnny Storm are adopted siblings. But the movie does absolutely nothing with that angle. Why introduce that element if you're not even going to do anything with it? I don't know. I don't even know how old these characters are supposed to be. There are so many time jumps in the film, with scenes that don't make any sense whatsoever, that I was definitely confused about everyone's age. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be watching 17-year-olds or 30-some-year-olds. And you would think that would be important information to have, since a 17-year-old would experience things differently than a 28-year-old, but whatever. Not even the cast is able to make these characters any more interesting, and this is a good cast. Miles Teller, Michael B. Jordan, and Kate Mara are all very well-respected actors. And Jamie Bell has been good in some stuff before, but there is absolutely no chemistry between any of these guys. I do not for 1 second believe that these 4 characters would ever be friends, let alone family. I barely buy the fact that they would even work with one another, since the narrative forces them to come together in convoluted ways for absolutely no reason. Toby Kebbell is awful as Dr. Doom, and Tim Blake Nelson is also in this movie, but his performance is so completely forgettable. So the only cast member I actually cared for was Reg E. Cathey as Dr. Franklin Storm, because he had a very warm and fatherly presence. Everyone else in the film felt rather cold and distant. But Cathey basically just delivers exposition to the audience, so Franklin Storm feels less like a character and more like a plot device. And once his character is gone from the story, Miles Teller picks up the mantle of shouting heavy-handed exposition at everyone. The dialogue here is just atrocious, and none of these well-regarded actors are able to elevate the material. I don't know what the fuck happened here. Trank has stated that the actors involved clearly wanted to be making and deserved to be in the more serious and darker movie that he originally envisioned, so maybe after Fox took control of the film, everyone just gave up. Or maybe that's not even true, since it has been said that Trank would constantly show up to work drunk, if he would even show up at all, and get into fights with Miles Teller. So who knows what really went on the actual sets, but I'm sure the behind-the-scenes drama wasn't good for the crew's morale. And I'm not even sure if Trank's vision would have been all that great anyway. Despite the good reviews, I didn't love Chronicle, and I definitely didn't care for Capone. I just think Trank needed more time before working on a big Hollywood blockbuster, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with admitting that. Because, as it stands, Fant4stic is just such a nothing movie. The film even feels hollow and empty, since the majority of the movie just features 4 people standing in front of a green screen. For a movie that had a $120 million budget, you would think that the set designs would be more memorable and that the CGI would be pretty decent. But that is just not the case. The set designs are so dull and forgettable, and the CGI is just plain awful in parts. And it gets worse as the film goes on. The Fantastic Four create an interdimensional portal in this movie, and the dimension they go to is just nothing. Literal nothingness. A barren wasteland with a mountain range in the distance. What is this place supposed to be? A planet? I believe someone in the film called it the 4th dimension. But why would the 4th dimension, which would be incredibly hard for our human minds to comprehend, just look like a dusty mountain range? Ugh. I know most people were pretty upset and angered when this movie first came out, but I definitely didn't have a strong emotional response, despite the tone of this review, but I guess that comes with having the benefit of time. My expectations were pretty low since most people had been bad-mouthing this movie for 5 years now, but I don't know if I would have been angry at the time either. I definitely get more upset over movies like Batman v Superman because all of the creative decisions were clearly made by the writer and the director. With Fant4stic, I don't really know who's to blame for the poor decision making. Trank? Fox? The cast? The crew? Everyone? I don't know. The movie is so directionless. The vision is lost somewhere in the ether. But regardless of who's to blame over the production of Fant4stic, nothing changes the fact that this is simply a boring ass movie. It takes itself way too seriously and tries to be dark and edgy despite having nothing serious or interesting to offer. If anything, Fant4stic made me want to go back and rewatch the older Fantastic Four movies. I haven't seen those films since I was a kid, but at least they were kid-friendly. They may have been silly and goofy and stupid, but they were made that way on purpose. Fant4stic, however, is bad on accident. Everyone involved thought they were making a good film. But if I was a kid when Fant4stic came out, I would have been bored out of my mind. And at least the older cast had believable chemistry together. The cast looked like they were actually having fun, which aided in giving those films their lighthearted tone and made the characters feel like real friends. But Fant4stic is such a joyless and lifeless experience. The movie itself feels like a soulless Cronenberg creation. It may not be the worst film I've ever seen, not by a long shot, but it is still underwhelming and just plain bad. I can't wait to see how Marvel reboots this franchise, because I would likely give Fant4stic 2 out of 5 stars. Thanks for watching. Nothing. Literal nothingness.